All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our March Phoenix Forum speaker event entitled The Silver Lining: Challenges and Opportunities Facing Today's Schools. Our speakers today, we have Tim Kaufman, Chairperson for UW Green Bay Professional Program and Education, Tony Logie, Associate Principal at Mayville Elementary School, Corey Baker, UWGB Education Program Coordinator and Recruiter, and Ben Markowski, bilingual kindergarten teacher at Dan's Elementary here in Green Bay. So again, welcome, gentlemen, for taking time to present here this evening. We will go ahead and get started tonight as folks come in. If there are questions, we have the chat box, but also if there are questions that come up, we'll have opportunities throughout to be able to have attendees be able to share that. So again, our forum will last approximately an hour with time again to have question and answer. So again, thank you all so much. I'm going to turn it over to Tim Kaufman, and he'll get us kicked off. I'm going to share the PowerPoint, and we'll go from there. So thank you again, guys.
Thank you. And this is a huge topic, as you know, and I would invite Scott, if you want to jump in at any time. You obviously are an expert in this area too. So, and if you could flip to, yeah. So really for this presentation, there's 4 goals that, just general goals that we have in place to leave you with. One is to talk just a little bit about teacher shortage in Wisconsin, in our state, and then to kind of transition over to Corey Baker, who will talk just a little bit about how our department and university has taken steps to address that shortage. And then we'll move to Tony Logie expertise in just selecting a few issues that are facing PK-12 schools and communities from an administrator standpoint. And then last but not least, we'll open it up for Ben Markowski, who is a bilingual kindergarten teacher extraordinaire and has helped our department out a lot. And so that's just kind of how we frame this discussion, even though it's a very large topic. So we also would leave some time for question and answer too. So at any time, if people have questions, please raise your hand. So, or, let us know and we'll go from there. So that's it for the goals. And what I'll have you do, Brian, just put those in. So the current teacher shortage in our state has really been highlighted by a January of this year report put out by the DPI, really looking at what that teacher shortage looks like and really how that shakes out. So one of the things in teacher ed is not only a teacher shortage in regards to preparing teachers, but also maybe a bigger issue is teacher retention. There's many metrics about that, but just in general, a good percentage of teachers, too big of a percentage, actually leave the field in the first 3 to 5 years. There's many causes to this retention issue too. One issue is our Foundations of Reading test, which is a high stakes test. It's interesting because the passing rates now are really at about 50% for full licensure. And this is, again, a high stakes test. So teachers who are at the elementary level to have full licensure need to pass that test. In January, they changed the format of that test, and at least the early indications are higher than, like a 50-50 piece in that area. The other issue that's interesting is the teacher workforce continues to be overwhelmingly white and female. Um, uh, especially at different levels, which is kind of interesting. Um, a few other points too. Enrollment in education prep programs still now is below 2008 and 2009 levels. So, that's obviously over a decade. Um, Wisconsin is producing more teachers than there are retirements. And one of the maybe most unsettling pieces finding is that since 2010, that the median salaries and wages for educator have been dropping over the last decade. Um, I did list, I think, just kind of a quick overview article that was in the Press Gazette there as a link that talks about the teacher shortage and just kind of a quick guide to 5 reasons or 5 pieces that are related to that issue. So I wanted to just give you just some things to think about in regards to this teacher shortage. And what I would do next is transition to Corey Baker, who is our recruiter advisor extraordinaire within our program, who will just talk a little bit about some of the things that we do from a program standpoint in addressing some of these issues. So Corey, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Kaufman. Yeah, so as Dr. Kaufman alluded, some of these trends are ongoing, like decade-long issue. Some of them have become more recent problems in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how the world has really changed as far as how students want to take classes, what they want their education to look like, and making sure we're being responsible for preparing them adequately then for the classroom when they're ready to teach. So one thing that has changed is that there aren't just an abundance of education students. Programs really aren't in the position to send students away. Whereas in the early 2000s, there were more students, education students who are interested in becoming teachers than were necessarily seats for those education courses. That's no longer the case. It's no longer a higher ed builds it, kids come type of a thing. We have to be more proactive in finding those students. So we've began implementing a number of intentional recruiting strategies. Some of this includes providing earlier access to people like myself, advisors, helping explain the different nuances of higher education as well as licensure. So in the state, right, you're not just working towards your bachelor's degree by going to a university in a teacher prep program, you're also working towards certification. And so breaking that down to be more accessible for students, especially first generation college students who don't necessarily know how to navigate higher education in the first place, and then adding on an additional barrier such as licensure, making sure that they have good advising early on so that they're able to get through a program as efficiently and cost effectively as possible. That helps breaks down those barriers as well, helping them grant success. Part of this is looking for ways to offering college courses at the high school level. Also working on creating grow your own programs where districts can start investing in their own students in the hopes that they return back and invest in their own communities. So looking at more intentional ways of bringing students into higher education for that teaching career, and really helping students, high school students in particular, think about teaching as a future profession, getting them early, getting them often, and helping them thinking about that in that light. Another thing we've been doing is looking at creative solutions from both the K-12 and higher education perspective. So taking a look at different ways for partnerships between K-12 and higher education, and how we can help, we being higher ed, can help the K-12 institutions, as well as having them then send us students to prepare to send back to to the K-12 setting. Mentioned one of those as a grow your own program, where if students complete X, Y, Z type of a requirement, right, the district promises them certain benefits or has some kind of a carrot at the end of the stick to entice them to consider that a career path. Other districts are encouraging students to explore career clusters early on, one of those being education. So getting them to think about that as a potential career in the future. Lots of room for improvement here. And this is where I think that last point really comes into play is the need for flexibility from all parties involved, both K-12 and higher education. The world is rapidly changing. We've all seen that since the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that this meeting is being held virtually, I think, is a good indication of that. We're all in separate spaces doing separate things. Many of our college students, that is the majority of their high school experience, was in a classroom situation similar to what this conversation is right now. So understanding that they have learned in a variety of different settings in a lot of different ways. So making sure we're meeting their needs to be prepared to enter schools in a more traditional setting or maybe non-traditional setting, being prepared to teach in a physical space, maybe a virtual space, and being prepared to do things that we can't anticipate, right? Teacher prep programs in 2008, 9, 10 could not have anticipated the pandemic and the way teaching would need to adapt and change at that time, right? And so giving our teachers, our students and teachers the ability to think on their feet, adapt as needed in order to be successful long term. A lot of that involves things that are haven't or that are new, that haven't always been the way they've been, right? Which takes some trust and some confidence that people will learn along the way. Figure really focusing on big picture items as opposed to maybe really specific nitty gritty things. So as a result, we've been looking at some different partnerships, again, with our K-12 friends who are able to help support our students in field experiences to learn and grow. Students then are the high school students that we're intentionally recruiting then see that that is a successful way to learn for them. And again, hoping that that continues to grow the program and produce high quality teachers that remain flexible, which then increases retention.
Corey, thank you so much. We also are joined today by one of the best administrators in the state, Tony Logie. And again, thank you, Tony, for giving your time. And Tony will give a perspective as he sees it to some issues impacting school now. So take it away there, Tony.
Thanks, Tim. Well, trying to tie it all together with kind of what Corey was, I was, Tim and I talked to think about a couple of reasons what are the problems right now? And there's a lot of challenges that we face every day at K-12. Lots of them. I could have said funding. I could have done the basic ones that you hear about all the time. But I think the couple that I chose, I think do kind of fit pretty well into the meaning of this cast here. Starting with like school report cards. I think we're talking about getting teachers, just getting people to become teachers. We're having a hard enough time to get that to happen. Okay, and now we're put under that undue stress of report cards. And I think I have a couple points on there. When you're talking about a school report card, I think, and I may go out of order, but I think number one is public opinion of them. I don't think that's truly understood. I think, and this is not the forum to talk about the report card, but I think people don't understand. They see numbers. It's a quantitative number, and they associate a number with how we all were raised, where a 75 was a C, and that's how you still interpret it to this day. And that's not necessarily the case, but also is that you're comparing districts that you're not comparing apples to apples. So now we're having a hard time getting teachers to prepare, getting well-prepared teachers. We're having a hard time doing that. Now we want to teach our kids the best. So now we're fighting each other across the street everywhere about, okay, we got to get the best report card. You should come into this district. You should come to that district. It pits people against one another. And quite honestly, it has an effect too on teachers. We were talking earlier before the meeting. it's almost like free agency where certain teachers are going to certain places because they can get more money. And keep in mind, funding is based on enrollment. Therefore, more when you start losing students, a lot of families choose not to send their kids to certain schools based on their report card number. Then you've got these other districts getting the money from smaller districts, and it puts an onus on smaller districts. It really does, to retain the teachers, to get teachers, and to have the resources to help kids. So I think that's part of, that's part of the issue we're all running into, along with, like I said, competition, where you're fighting against your brethren. Realistically, try to get the best students that you possibly can. Open enrollment is so prevalent nowadays. It's promoted, and that was never thought of 20 years ago. And it puts a stress on administrative meetings, and all that stuff trickles down eventually through the teachers, through the students, which is the most important thing, in the family. So I think, keep in mind, when you see report cards, there's a lot that goes into it, and a lot that changes every 3 years. So I think if you were going to do your, justice, make sure you check schools throughout the course of, a 10-year span, kind of a historical longitudinal study. So I think that's one thing we always are trying to improve, is how we educate our kids. We want to get the best scores as possible, but some of us are starting to run out of resources to provide those things, whether the resources are tangible kid used items or just people to teach them properly, teach to them. So I think that's a major issue that it's not covered unless it's in the newspaper, and then it goes away. But in the background, that is going on constantly. It's trying to figure out how to get our scores up, which it shouldn't be like that, because we're talking about people here, and that's my own personal opinion. But we're talking about kids, and you're not comparing apples to apples. So that's one topic that I probably could talk a long time, but I was told I had 10 minutes, so I better move on a little bit. I think another thing, kind of somewhat connected but somewhat not, is the SEL in schools now. Again, we're talking about keeping teachers and getting teachers into programs and getting kids into the program. And now we're talking about social emotional learning. And yes, that does exist. There's a lot, that's differentiation. All those things existed in the past, but they were just formed in a different terminology. Okay, now it's got a new name. It's got a new curriculum. And a lot of our teachers, as I said earlier, we have more teachers that are applying than are retiring. We have a lot of veteran teachers that don't even know how are you going to prepare them for the curriculum to teach it to the kids. So that's one aspect of SEL, is getting the staffs able to present properly the curriculum, and that's a culture shift in a lot of people, and that's nobody's fault. We were not brought up with this. People my age, and I'll age myself, I'm almost 48. We were not taught this at all. So now we're talking about trying to engage them in a brand new curriculum, which may go against some people's ideals. But keep in mind, you look to the category on the left, in order to improve that, the one I'm talking about currently has got to be addressed within the classroom with the students, because that's going to help with the test scores rising. So I think that's a critical issue in education today. And I think with that, you are starting to see a lot more schools. You're trying to combat that by bringing in professional organizations, like we use Purveya, we've used Bellin, different organizations to provide some just SEL like therapy for our students. And it's amazing how many of our kids need this. This is no longer is this a stigma. This is something that is helping tremendously, where our kids not only are getting support from home, but they'll get it from classroom, from their school. In addition to that, now they're getting it from a professional. And a lot of these programs are, they're pretty much, I've been in 2 different districts since it's been kicked off, and I've yet to see a kid turn away because of money. There's always a way to get it done, but we're trying everything and anything, establishing these relationships with these clinics and with these medical providers to try to help our kids. And quite honestly, you could hire probably 3 people, 3 adult psychologists or therapists, 5 days a week for 8 hours a day to work with not only kids, quite honestly, but even teachers too. I think that's another thing as well. So but all this ties into that report card. It truly does indirectly, because if you really look at it, all of the stuff that we talk about is connected. It truly is connected. And addressing these issues, this is a big issue. This isn't just in our school, the SEL learning, this is everywhere nationally. And COVID did kind of intensify this a little bit, because you saw more and more students in need of that type of support as well. But we got to give it to them in the classroom. That's when the teachers come in, and we got to prepare our teachers for that. So it's really education has transformed a lot in the past 15, 20 years. Going to the next thing with social media. We are definitely a digital age. We are talking on digitally right now. This is very common now to all of us sitting in this room, regardless if you're 25 or if you're 55. This is normal now. We're used to this, but it's not always used properly for multiple different reasons. That's kind of the kicker here, is that yes, digital world, we're in it, we utilize it, but at what point, there's certain points where it needs to stop, because the word digital social media is so gigantic, and social media can do wonders to promote and show the great things you're doing and showing how great your school is, what you have to offer, but yet it's used as venting platforms when things aren't good. And it's the First Amendment, freedom of speech, it exists. It's not put out by the school district, but there's a lot of platforms that, this is the adults now, that aren't technically using it properly. They're basing it off of snippets of sometimes not the whole story, sometimes opinion, and they don't know whole stories, and they're saying these things. They're hurting certain schools based on one isolated incident that may have happened. And I think we all know, sitting in this room, fighting back with that it's too costly on our hands. And quite honestly, I think a lot of us are immune to it, and we have thick enough skin, but it's not easy. But you have to deal with those type of things. But when those things get presented through different Twitter, through whatever, right, it can directly relate back to your school report card. Well, gosh, look at their numbers, and plus they got all this going on at their school. Why would we do that? It's only a small snippet. So I think that truly does affect schools. It affects individual schools, and it could be one minor incident. So it's utilizing those things properly, but also it's used as a tool to attract people as well. So it's the yin to the yang. So you're trying to figure out how to properly utilize social media in the right way. And I still have not found that solution. I'd be a millionaire because I would have it. But nonetheless, that's just the adult, that's just the public perception end of it. But then we're talking about our students, and our students, they don't know any different. I'll give you a quick example. That I was at my daughter's volleyball practice, and a little 33-year-old girl came up to me and saw me playing on my phone, and she watched me for 2 minutes, and she asked me if she could try it. I handed it to her, and she figured it out in a snap. I didn't have to tell her anything. This is where our students are. And the issue is, in the classroom, what do you do with them? Do you allow stuff? Everybody has an iPad or a Chromebook or their phones. Different schools have different rules, so on and so forth. You think about it, depending upon where you're at, what is a child doing in the classroom, and what's a teacher supposed to do when they're not doing what's appropriate? Once again, look to the left. Are they learning? And are they being distracted? Are they using for the incorrect purposes? And quite honestly, it's becoming, as a teacher, it's tough, because you weigh whether or not you want to take away digital devices from kids. But then you also need to use them, because a lot of textbooks, as we're looking through textbook adoption, they're not even hardcover books anymore. It's all online, and those things are there. So now you struggle as an educator, becoming the police, when you're trying to watch when your kids are supposed to be doing some work or utilizing some resource. It's all online, and are they on that, or are they playing Minecraft? So it makes it difficult. And we're talking about all these different things, yet sometimes we're providing things, that are attracting attention away. Attention spans have changed, which in turn could have a direct effect on the report card. So I don't want to make this all about the report card, but I just think it's a hidden thing that people don't understand, the connectivity with this. And finding the happy medium on how to control all of this and how to address everything from Twitter to a traumatic event in a student's life. It's a trick because remember, a lot of this is these report cards are based off of one test pretty much in a way. And what happens if that was the bad day? What happens if that was the bad day for 10? What happens if that was the bad day for 30? So it's finding ways, strategies, anything to get across to our students to prepare them for the future, which is the most important thing, getting our kids ready. So that was a long-winded way of trying to interconnect three different things, but it ties into earlier what Corey was saying. It's retention, getting people into the program do you want to take this on? Yes, you do. Because if you're watching this, if you're part of this right now, this is what it is now. And this is what we're looking for now in our profession. This is what I'm looking for when we're looking to hire new teachers. It's understanding you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to do a lot of different things at one time. And the good thing is the students that are coming out of universities right now, this is your age. So it helps. You're used to the digital age. You're used to all the different things going on. You're used to multitasking, which are huge, huge assets as an educator. So I think that's what we need. That's what we want. That helps a ton. And that helps you be successful because kids do better. They truly do. So I appreciate just the time to kind of talk about three things that I could have talked an hour about in each one, but it's a tougher job than you think it is. It really is. But if you're in the programs, you're made for it. You're doing it because you want to be there.
Tony, thanks so much for that
Sure.
insight. Awesome. We'll turn to our last speaker here, who you can probably tell is a Notre Dame fan with his Teach Like a Champion in the background. Ben Markowski, who is a bilingual kindergarten teacher at Dan's Elementary. So Ben, take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm Ben Markowski. This is my son, Paxton. Say hi.
Hi.
What I didn't tell him is he's going to be talking for me today, so.
What?
I'm just kidding. All right, you can go. So I've been at Dan's Elementary School in Green Bay for 15 years now. I've been blessed and able to teach bilingual kindergarten for every year. And I love kindergarten, and I teach it because it's to me, it's the only grade that I'm sure that I'm smarter than most of the kids in the class. But Paxton, can you pause it? Can you go upstairs now and watch that? Thanks, buddy. So I teach what's something called a one-way bilingual program. So it's 70% of the day in Spanish and 30% in English. And Dan's Elementary, where I teach, there's a total of 540 students, of which 429 receive free and reduced lunch. So it's one of the quote unquote poorer schools in our school district. And Tony, what you were saying about 4 or 5 of the things, I swear you're reading my notes. So I was going to say pretty much exactly what you had said. But in my humble opinion, teaching is one of the greatest professions there is. You can make a huge difference and impact on some of these kids' lives. So I was going to talk a little bit about some of the students at Dan's. It's a pretty transient population of students, meaning they're going mid-year, they're leaving somewhere else out of the state, out of the country. And on top of that, we're also getting a lot of students from Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico. And some of these, so personally for me, I teach kindergarten. Some of these kids that are coming in from out of state or out of country, their kindergarten classes or programs are a lot different than ours. So they're pretty much glorified daycare centers. An example of this was, I think it was last week, we had a kindergartner that just brand new from Cuba. He was outside at recess and he dropped his pants and started going to the bathroom on one of the trees. And he kind of got a talking to, and his mom came after school that day and she was kind of defending him and she said, "What's wrong with that? That's what they're told to do when we were in Cuba living there." So there's some pretty big differences between our schools and the schools out of the country. So also a lot of these families that I teach, the parents are uneducated, so they're unable to help their students at home. So it's kind of it's an uphill battle for teachers. When I was growing up, my parents, I lived in a middle class family in Appleton, Wisconsin, and My parents both had college degrees. They're able to help me with all this stuff. And we have conferences this week, and I sat down with one of my students' families, and I gave him the conference sheet for his boy, and I could tell he couldn't read anything that I had written on there. So when Tony, when you're saying stuff about the report cards and people see these grades that are report card scores that our schools are getting, there should be an asterisk, in my opinion, that said, the poverty level at Dan's is, way up here. Not an excuse, but it does, play into it. So then 2 years ago, you add COVID to the mix, and oof, that came with its own set of challenges. I had to try to figure out how to teach 25-year-olds for hours every day virtually. And I think when people ask me how was it, I say that the greatest example I have is, so you can imagine, like, the Brady Bunch show in the beginning, how it shows all the pictures all over. That's kind of how my class was set up in Zoom. We started at 9 o'clock every morning during COVID time. And at 9:02, I had one girl in one of the boxes that was sleeping, and the girl right underneath her was eating a dilly bar at 9:02 a.m. So those are the kind of examples that we we had when we were teaching. But it was awesome. We made it through. All right, I got a couple other notes here. So one of the main differences I've always thought in education today compared to even 15 years ago when I started, I feel like the grades all got moved up a grade. So when I was younger, we learned in kindergarten the letters of our name and how to share and play and sing songs. So now in kindergarten, we are expecting these kids, and especially at my school, coming from, impoverished families. So these kids are required to read at a level 4 reading level. They're required to write personal narratives, how-to books, and informational books with 2 to 3 sentences on each page, and 3 pages of that. So I think that's one of the huge differences that I see. And in my opinion, sometimes I think we're pushing the kids a little too far. Instead of teaching them how to talk with one another, how to make eye contact when you're talking, how to solve problems. And a lot of times I hear kind of gripes from teachers, people nowadays saying, these kids don't know how to talk to each other, they have no manners. Well, I think that's one of the main reasons why, is because we're kind of going past all these things and pushing them, a little farther than I think they should be pushed. So some of the solutions, in my opinion, are great family contact, establishing those relationships with the students' parents and the students, really getting to know these students. I think when a teacher can make these connections with the families and parents, it's invaluable, because the parents are going to be more inclined to help out at home and more involved in the classroom. And also, like Tony said, making learning fun. Some of the things that I still do, and I look ridiculous sometimes, but I wear costumes, sing songs. I play old school music, and my students all know who Elvis is. They love Elvis. One of my girls last year was obsessed with him, so I bought her a shirt from Amazon, and she wore it pretty much every day. Stains, no stains. I wear a duck costume when we're learning the letter D, because duck starts with D. So just things like that. And I still get, like, middle school students now or high school students who come back or send me emails saying, Mr. Markowski, I remember when you taught us this. When you came to school in a duck costume, when you sang us a song, if they don't come back and say, I remember when you taught us how to do this how-to unit or these writing prompts, they remember the fun stuff. So I think if you can make it fun for everyone, and the students especially, it'll be a lot more enjoyable. Also, my last point, teaching manners and respect. I feel like that's gone by the wayside. One really basic thing I teach my students is when someone asks you how you are, you say, I'm good, how are you? And all the teachers at my school will say, hey, yep, I know, were you Mr. Markowski's kid? Because they always continue to ask, even in the later grades, I'm good, how are you? So manners is pretty big too for me. Sometimes a little more important than writing and math and reading and pushing. So make it fun for the students, and enjoyable for yourself as well, and have fun. And I think it'll be a lot better for teaching and for the students learning.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you all for excellent insight. We'll open this up for comments or questions or discussion, and just kind of an aside. I guess I didn't realize this, but each of you have been either an undergrad or graduate student of mine, and it's been a real honor to to see your success and to share in that. So thank you again, Corey, Ben, and Tony for giving some of your valuable time here. So, any question?
Well, representing the audience of this group, I can say I don't have one question. I have two questions and a wondering. But first of all, I have to say that Ben Markowski, it's impossible that you've been teaching for 15 years because it seems like you were in my class only about 3 years ago. So I don't know how that happened, but.
Yes, I can concur.
Yeah. So one of my questions is this. So I work with the deans and directors group across the state of UW system schools of education and the private colleges as well. And last year, there was a working group that was put together by UW system to look at the teacher shortage and possible things we could do in the state in terms of recruiting more teachers. And we also talked some about the retention issue as well, but not as much. And then there was a report that was generated, and it was presented to the Board of Regents at their June meeting. One of the things that we also addressed, and I'm curious from this panel, what your thoughts are on this, was not only how do we recruit people to become teachers and retain them, but how do we diversify that pipeline? And we looked at the literature, what was out there, we looked at what some other states were doing and so on, and we had some recommendations, but nothing that was really earth-shattering. So I'm just curious from this group, what your thoughts are on how do we not only get a bigger pipeline and retain them better, but how do we also diversify that pipeline?
I think one thing that we do, I have a lot of different thoughts that came through my mind when you asked that question. I guess first of all, one thing that we're doing is having our high school students come in and work with our younger students. We're making that pretty much a common thing where they get a chance, whether they want to go into education or not, if they got extra time, whether they need it for community service, whatever it may be, is to get them, and it's more than one or two, it's 10, 15, to get them into the building already, and they're still 16, 17, 18, to basically get a taste of what it is like. So I know, and you're seeing a lot of districts that were not unique to that, but you're seeing a lot of districts that are starting to do that. I think that is huge. I think with that too, I think getting the teaching degree tangible. I think, and I got to watch how I say this, but there's more to this job than to be the expert on phonics. What your job is to get kids to develop relationships like Ben had addressed. It's to get to know kids, and this can be in any culture. It's blind to anything other than a person who you are. We need more people that understand the reality of the world. Ben made a very good point earlier about manners. I was so happy you said that, Ben, because writing is important and reading, but life skills are just as important. We need to attract people that are going to teach and profess those life skills to these kids, whether you're in inner city Milwaukee or you're in Mayville, Wisconsin. We got to recruit from within and to let people know it's tangible, it's doable, provide some education. I know earlier, I think Tim, you had addressed about bringing some of those classes into the high school, some college level classes. Maybe it was you, Corey, I can't remember, but it's things like that. And actively as administrators, as teachers, encouraging our students to just try it and to see how it goes. Because you'd be amazed at how many people end up saying, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is the coolest thing in the world. But it's but we have so much high stakes testing. We have some of the things I kind of mentioned too, that deter people from that. When in essence, what they don't understand is if you're being yourself and developing those relationships, the other stuff's going to come with it. It may not be tomorrow, but so I think there's a couple different ways without monopolizing this conversation that I can think of off the cuff right now that would help. But I'm not saying that's a solution, but it's taking risk is really what it comes down to. Instead of being scared of numbers and scores and how we look against one another, it's taking risks to see what's going to be good for our kids. And I think that's a very important thing to do in our profession. It really is. Sometimes those numbers, they're just numbers. They really are.
Yeah, Tony, I think you really hit the nail on the head when it's really about relationships, and even taking that one step further is providing students from marginalized communities the opportunities to enjoy school and have a positive experience for school. When I'm meeting with our students in an advising setting and I ask them like, hey, what inspired you to be a teacher? Why do you want to be a teacher? By far, the most common answer is they'll start talking about one of their favorite teachers from high school, middle school, elementary school, doesn't matter. It's almost always a teacher inspired them to become a teacher. 9 times out of 10, that's the case. For a lot of individuals in marginalized communities, if the school system's beating them down, right? If it's not set up for their success, it's really challenging, right? If they did not enjoy their experience in school, chances are they don't want to continue to be a part of that system, right? So it's about helping those students have a person to go to in that school, have a good relationship, become that person who is their champion and really helps them be successful. So it's all about building community and building partnerships. And Tony, I love hearing that you said like the high school students working with those younger students, right? And that building that community can really, really help with that long-term sustainability in the education profession with both students amongst different grade levels and then teachers amongst their students. Once you have that supportive community, I think it can really start generating itself, but it's getting that flow of diversity in so that diverse students see diverse teachers and see that they can do it as well, right? If they only are seeing teachers that don't look like them, it's really hard for them to then envision themselves taking that next step in becoming a teacher. So it's providing them the support and access early on and establishing really strong relationships and community for those students. How that's done, it's not easy. It's one step at a time, right? It's starting with one individual, making a good relationship with one person, and starting with the next one after that. But I'm curious to get if you have any additional insight working with a bilingual population. I know one thing you mentioned in your previous one was like the additional complexity of having a transient population, right? And that's another factor with both students of poverty, students from poverty, as well as minority groups. I'm curious if you had any additional insight there.
Yeah, I mean, the students always enjoy seeing other teachers there or the Hispanic students, I should say, that are able to speak Spanish, because a lot of them still aren't able to speak a lot of English. But that also adds another complexity because all of our state testing is done in what language? English. So it's difficult there, but yeah, it's always great, and I think there's a huge need for more bilingual teachers, and as well as male bilingual teacher. We're a dying breed, so please, if you're out there, we could use you.
So my next question is probably maybe more for Tony than anybody else, just because you're at the high school level, although maybe at the elementary level this would be true as well. But it goes back to your comments about social media and the use of that in classrooms. The next step in that is artificial intelligence and chatbots. And we're starting to see that show up here on our campus where, the temptation is there for the student to say, well, I've got this paper and I don't really feel like I know much about this topic. So I'm going to log on to the Microsoft website and put in my prompt to write my paper on topic X. And at least it's going to be a starting point for me. Maybe I'm not going to submit it verbatim, but maybe I am because I'm under a time crunch. But are you seeing, Tony, that as becoming an issue at the high school level already? And I guess the thought is now in the conversations that I've been in is that how do we use something like a chat bot and what it can produce as a tool for learning more than saying you can't do that in this class, just like you can't bring your cell phone to this class because you could look up answers on a test or whatever. And I know that there are conversations going on like that as to how we can use this as a tool for learning, but I don't know how far down the road we are in becoming good at doing that, since, you know, this is just a relatively new phenomenon.
I think, and I'm going to speak too as a dad, because I have 2 high schoolers. Okay. So here, if you track back, okay, when this, years ago, this is my 25th year in the profession. Years ago, we had Turnitin. We had those type of things that were utilized to try to stop some of those things. Okay. And I think today, fast forward to 2023, with this AI, with all these things that do exist, one solution, and we've talked about this with my children, with staff, and yeah, like I said, I'm at elementary, middle, and high school. I've been at all of them, right? You're starting to see more utilizing those things now as resources, but sometimes going back to this good old writing it within the classroom and seeing if you can get the standards met that way as well. It doesn't always have to be a typing type thing, but then you're starting to talk about, you're working on writing again, you're working on doing research, utilizing sources, how to cite you. So you try to, all things, a lot of people, not everybody's going to college, I know that, but it's something that you're going to have to learn to do. So it's trying to figure out how to utilize what exists now, because it's useless to fight it. The only thing that's going to change, I think, about it's going to start costing some money for kids to pay for it. And you're going to get one kid to, if I'm a kid, I already have it constructed. 10 of us are going to pop in $50 a month and it's going to be fine. So it's utilizing what it is, what you see from it. But then I can think back to 10 years ago when you talked about Wikipedia and how Wikipedia was not the end all be all. It's not always truthful, factual information. On top of that, too, I think about providing resources for the kids within the classroom to utilize. And sometimes it's, you think about it, writing's is a huge skill. Typing, everybody can type now anyway. Everybody's typing it. We have typing classes for first graders. They're already working on typing. Okay. So is it the skill, the ability to type, or is it skill, ability to write? Sometimes you can write it. And then the kids also know too, you got to do it in front of somebody. Now, the argument, I think too, this is from my daughter, we had this conversation, ironically, is that, well, yeah, I could just look at it at home and write it up and bring it into school the next day. Yeah, I get it. There's going to be ways around everything and anything. There truly is. But then I go back, it's no different than Turnitin back in 1999 and 2000, 2001. You still have to submit your papers through a certain way, and you're still going to be able to catch some of those things. You're not going to catch everything, but I think it evolves with the time. And that kind of goes back to flexibility I talked about earlier, where, you got to be able to juggle 18 different things, but being prepared for it. And I'm not saying the answers I gave were the best, but at least you have a game plan that you could start bouncing off people sitting in this room right now and a lot of other people, because we could poke holes in everything, but starting to come down to how do you want to handle it? How do you want to utilize it? And then maybe it's a teaching point where you teach them how to take information from sources and properly add it to something. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's no different than using Encyclopedia Britannica. It really isn't. It just teaches. So you almost like I want to say embrace, that might not be the right word, but understand it's there, and how are we going to adapt with it as time goes along? It's going to be a problem in colleges too, I'm assuming, as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's something actually it's an interesting conversation. When I taught Spanish, right, as my first year teaching Spanish, we were still using paper dictionaries in the classroom and things. And by the time 2 years ago when I was teaching, you had an app on your phone that could translate an entire piece of text nigh perfectly, just by taking a picture of it, right? And so the technology just evolved so rapidly, and it really forced our department to think, what's our role, right? Like, how many of our students are actually going on with the intent of becoming fully bilingual people? Or is there a way to use this, like you said, Tony, to leverage maybe some other skills and abilities along the way, such as like, how do you know if something's accurate, if something is true? How can we teach them other skills and abilities along the way? And for those that want to, in my case, learn the language, right? There's that intrinsic motivation that you're hoping will push them through and continue them through. And for the other students, teaching them the importance of things like integrity, as well as the ability to use technology in a productive and efficient manner.
The only thing I would add on that too, and this is interesting to me, is I think that the fear too may be less about, well, students are going to be able to, rig the system. And to me, it hits more home to, the issue of every student has all the information in the world in their pocket and can access that, which really cuts counter to, in a traditional sense, teacher-student relationship and expert novice and those sorts of things. So, as we discuss these things, I think into the future, a teacher is going to be less about, I have this expertise and I can give it to you, and more about, I'm going to help you critically assess how you get to the finish line. And, you're more advanced than me in accessing information, so I think to me that, there's a lot of nuances to this whole issue, but the thing that I think scares the heck out of people most is the impact that it has on the teacher student relationship in a traditional sense. So
And going back to another historical example, I know in the 1950s, when everybody was buying a television for the first time, the thought was, we're not going to need teachers in the future because kids are just going to watch instructional programs on television, and that's going to be their school. Well, that didn't happen either. So, we weathered that storm as well.
I think, kind of a side note with that too, it's how we have evolved, and a lot of things, it's skill based versus performance. So I think you got to keep that always. I think everybody's got to keep that in mind always. We're talking about skill development. Remember, and I know you all know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but not all these kids that we're preparing right now are preparing them to go to GB or to Harvard, or you know what I mean? Some of these kids, maybe they don't need to get in depth breaking down Macbeth, right? Maybe they don't have to. Maybe we got to prepare them to survive in this world and to be able to write coherent sentences, and maybe that's on the topic of their choosing. So I think I'm not saying we should go one way or the other, but I'm thinking broaden kind of off what you're saying, Tim. We don't have to be the experts. We're the facilitators. We're leading them to develop the skill. Now, how you get to that, how you meet that skill, can be interpreted thousands of different ways. And that's going to be also unique to your culture, to your environment. That's going to be unique to a lot of different things. So I think throwing a lot of those things into play, which may ruffle feathers in the educational world, but really a lot of these people, I thought when you were talking about this, is that some of these kids rely on AI, stuff like that, when they're scared, when they're fearful, when they don't know how to do something. I'd say there's a high percentage of kids that rely on that because they're just not confident. I think giving them practice time in the classroom, giving them the skill development, remember, everything is about skill now, but we're still assessing based on a number. we're ruled on a number, but it's about the skill development, and every kid is going to get to it in a different way at a different time. So I think there's a lot of other, this is a great question that you had, and you could branch off 4,000 different ways with it. You really could. It's going to be, and a conversation might be different in a different arena, different place.
I think, Brian, you're muted, but I think we're getting to the end of our time here. So it's interesting because audience-wise, it's been so intriguing to just talk with you all about these issues. And again, Tony, Corey, Scott, Brian, we appreciate the chance to do this and also to attend. And if we do record this, I definitely would like to play this back for my class. So
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
you can,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm having issues with my computer, so I appreciate you kind of closing up. I had just one quick question, and if you want to have a couple quick answers to this, but many of our alumni, of course, have children that are in K-12 right now, may or may not be educators themselves, but what can they do to help support the educators in their schools and the schools themselves? Any feedback? Because I know I'm sure you get quite a pendulum of differences of parental help or just relationships and whatnot. So I guess I'll just share that as if anybody would like to just jump on that question.
I could jump on it, Brian, but I'd go 18 different directions with it. I'm giving Corey a shot first. I'm giving Corey a shot. He wants to go first. I think it's support. I think that's the biggest thing, is to be supportive. And not to assume what you're hearing is the truth. I think anybody, and a lot of times, a lot of conversations I have with families and situations that may get like that is, before, you don't have to make a decision right away, for number one. And number two is, before you want to not support, reverse the roles first. You know what I mean? And then think about, how would you want it to be seen or assumed, such as something like that, right? So you get everybody to slow down and support things first, and the truth comes out no matter what it is. But the support should be there no matter what, no matter where your child is, quite honestly, whether that's a sports, that's a dance, that's in scouts. It's, you want to support your child to the utmost, but also not always believing what you see, because there may be more to it. And like I used to preach to my kids, I still preach: ask why, ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. Because at least you're getting a chance to speak and to be heard. And us in this room are excellent listeners. We have to be listeners. We got to listen to we have to not listen to respond. You have to listen to understand. And then you can get through anything, to be quite honest with you. But it's that relationship thing too. Corey, you were talking about it earlier. Develop relationships with families. Reach out to families. Not only bad things. Like I reach out good times. I love when I make phone calls and they say, "What did he do?" Oh, actually, I'm calling because this is an awesome thing. You know what I mean? So you kind of catch them off guard, but you develop that kind of stuff. But it's to always be supportive. Always don't believe. You always want to believe your child. And a lot of times they're right, but there's times that, and in difficult situations, there may be more to it. There truly may be. So if you got questions, ask. Just ask. Don't put it on Twitter. Just ask the person who's involved, because we would all appreciate that. If anybody had a question with me, I would appreciate if you just come to me. I don't hold grudges. I'm not an old, I'm not mean. So I think that's one way of answering that in one capacity.
Yeah, and the other thing just to add is, teachers go into teaching because they love kids, right? All the best teachers out there are teen kids. We're on the same side as you. We want to make your kid the best as possible, your student is the best as possible, right? And so remembering that we're a team. It's not us versus you. We're all in this together and work together. That's kind of my other add on to that. Otherwise, what Tony said is spot on.
You're muted, Brian.
You can't hear you, Brian.
Sorry. Thank you again. Thank you guys for taking the time tonight to meet with us. We truly appreciate that. This will again be recorded and saved. We'll send out a link to those that had registered, but then we will also put this on our alumni page under the Phoenix Forum area. But again, thank you guys. I truly appreciate that. And again, have a great evening. So thank you so much.
You guys as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
All right.